Okay, I think we might be there. Sorry if anyone can see me, I'm just checking that we are actually online before I start talking. Just going to refresh the page. Yeah, we're there. Okay, and it's muted. Amazing. So welcome everybody to the National Creative Writing Industry Conference. I'm Zoe. The conference is from Comma Press in partnership with Manchester Writing School, and this is the first of our free panel events. This is how the publisher works with you. So we're joined by loads of industry professionals who are going to talk us through the process and the relationship between how the publisher works with their authors and get into the nitty-gritty of that for writers who don't know. So I'm joined by Jonathan Peyer from HarperNorth. He's a commissioning editor at HarperNorth. Cherise Lopes-Baker, who's a commissioning editor at Jacaranda, who is one of the publishers of our keynote speaker, Irenison, who spoke last night. Poppy Stimpson, who is a publicist at Pushkin Press, and the panel is chaired by Royle. He's an editor at Nightjar and also a member of Manchester Writing School. So the panel will run for about 45 minutes. I'm going to disappear into the background and then I'll pop back up to manage the Q&A. There's a chat box on the side of the YouTube stream. So if anyone has any questions at any point, just ping them and I will bring them to the panel at the end of the session. So I think that's everything. So I'm going to hand over to Nick, if you want to kick us off, please. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much. And hello, everybody. So good morning. And it's my great pleasure to welcome Poppy and Cherise and Jonathan to this session. I'll briefly introduce myself. I'm Nicholas Royle. I run Nightjar Press, which is a small press specializing in short stories, single short stories published in chapbook format. I was also working, kind of still am, but only just as a commissioning editor for Salt Publishing for about 8 or 9 years, still doing Best British Short Stories for them. And I am a reader in creative writing in the Manchester Writing School at Manchester Metropolitan University. So that's me, and maybe I'm also a writer, and so I've got a number of different perspectives on the business of what happens between the writer and the publisher. And so I've got the writer's perspective, I've got the publisher's perspective, and at some point during the next hour, maybe I'll talk a bit about my own experiences, but for now, I would like to ask our 3 panelists to introduce themselves. And could we begin, please, with Poppy Stimpson?
Yes, thank you very much, Nick. And thank you, Zoe. This is such a fun thing to be part of, so I'm really grateful to be here. I am a publicist. I'm publicity director at Pushkin Press, which is based in London. It's a small independent literary publisher. We publish everything from timeless classics to contemporary novels for children and adults, and I work across everything. I'm publicity director there. I started out in 2014 at Little Brown Book Group, which is part of Hachette, as a publicity assistant. And I climbed the ladder of publicity, and I was at Hachette, and then I moved over to Penguin Random House, and I was at Transworld for a couple of years, and then I was at Orion publishing back at Hachette, and now I'm at Pushkin Press. So that's me.
What a great career, and only 25.
20, I wish.
Thank you very much, Poppy. Cherise, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Cherise. I am currently commissioning editor at Jacaranda for fiction, and that includes young adult. I started a young adult list. I also contribute to Words of Color and am one of the founders of Desert Rose, which is a literary magazine for Friends of Color.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Cherise. And Jonathan, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, morning. Thanks, Nick. I'm a non-fiction commissioning editor at HarperNorth, which is a new division of HarperCollins based in Manchester, which I think is the first, more or less the first editorial office for any one of the big 5 publishers outside of London in living memory. I joined HarperNorth at the end of June. Prior to that, I worked for Manchester University Press, commissioning trade and scholarly books for probably about 18 months. And before that, for 10 years, I worked for an indie publisher in London called Hearst. Again, non-fiction, as domestic international politics, largely, bit of history, religion. And hopefully my career has been nicely bookended by generational recessions. So I graduated into the 2008 recession, and here I am arriving at my dream job in another one. So HarperNorth is designed to publish authors from writing about or based in the north of England, basically. It's been overlooked, I think.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jonathan. Thank you, Cherise, and thank you, Poppy. I'd like to kick off with a question for Cherise, if I may. I want to know how your relationship with writers is established. Can you perhaps talk us through the process of acquiring a new author? Tell us what steps you take together while working on their manuscript.
Well, it's an interesting and varied process, right from the first step of acquisition, because obviously you can acquire through an agent, in which case there's that middle person. You can acquire from someone without an agent. It can often be through grassroots, like right now, DB Pit is going on. So right now I'm looking at acquiring things by just liking tweets and having them submit to me. But once you have acquired, I think I usually like to have an introductory call with the author. We usually have a slightly extensive author questionnaire that we have the author fill out, and that is then used by our entire team throughout the publication process to refer back to. And you treat it, I think, like any relationship. You get to know each other, you get to know what's happening in each other's lives or what's happening in the publishing house of the world that might affect the process. But it's just, yeah, a beautiful relationship.
Can I take you back to one of the first things you mentioned, Cherise? You mentioned agents. I'm interested in, now Jacaranda is, I think, an independent press.
Yeah.
Yeah. Does that mean that you are keen on agents or less keen on agents? Are you open to approaches from writers who are unagented, or do you prefer approaches from agents, like, say, the bigger publishers?
Oh, we're very open to approaches from writers without agents. We want it to be as accessible as possible to people, and while also recognizing that if you have an agent, that might be very good for the author themselves. We're just very open to working with whatever's best for the author, okay, or whatever the author is at that time.
That's great. I'm going to come back to you. I want to quickly put one of those questions to you, Jonathan, if I could, and it's the agent question again. Before going back to ask you to talk about the relationship with the writer, I'm kind of, I made an assumption there about bigger publishers being keener on agents. Would you agree with that? And do HarperNorth ever look at unagented writers?
Yeah, so I've been lucky enough to experience the kind of full gamut of working with agents versus not working with agents through my career. I would say at HarperNorth, the 5 books I've acquired so far have been roughly 50-50 through agents and direct. I came to the job from a slightly different background. So a lot of the work I've been doing in the early months has been establishing a presence with agents, explaining what it is we're looking for, which is, very kind of precise sort of book and type of author. But yeah, we have open submissions. We have done since early July. We've seen a lot of really good material come through that, and I know. Well, a book that I signed up only today came through open submissions, which is a dream scenario. I mean, I prefer, I have to say, working directly with authors, which is not to say that agents are in any way an obstacle. They're frequently the gateway to authors you would never have thought of. But I like each scenario equally, I would say, probably. But
And
Yeah.
are HarperNorth, you said that you're non-fiction, HarperNorth acquiring fiction titles as well?
We are, yeah. So the publishing director, Jen Pegg, is acquiring fiction. There's another kind of part-time fiction editor joining us as well. I think the list will be roughly 50-50 non-fiction and fiction going forward. Yeah.
And could I put to you the same question that I put to Cherise? Just tell us a little bit about the relationship you have with writers, how it's established, and the process of acquiring a new author, etc.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few guiding principles, I suppose, which first and foremost, which is that authors are providing a service to us that we can't find elsewhere. So in that sense, it's a sort of a seller's market. I would say that publishing is almost a truism. It's a relationships business. So I think it's about establishing trust, demonstrating that you'll be a good partner, because frequently people have put their entire life's work into, and quite a lot of themselves, into a book project. So it's about doing right by the authors. There's and necessarily a degree of empathy. You have to understand what's going on in someone's life and what they're hoping to achieve by writing a book, which is really important. I think for HarperNorth, one of the things we've been keen to do is to kind of demythologize publishing or the publishing process. So it might be totally familiar to you as an editor, but it's really important to remember that authors are frequently coming to this entirely new. So there's all sorts of jargon, even kind of commercial terms that need explaining, I would say. And frequently also it's quite an uncertain process. So I think speedy communication is really important. Clarity on direction and the timeliness of the decisions is really important. Obviously, there are certain challenges to this particular environment we're operating in. So a lot of my meetings are digital. A lot of them are kind of speculative because I can't get out and do the kind of network building I would normally do. So it's also about partnering with trusted organizations who have that kind of first look at authors and kind of take them through the process. Places like Manchester Writing School, of course.
Right. Excellent. Thank you, Jonathan. Poppy, can I ask you to give us the publicist's perspective, or indeed the publicity director's perspective on the relationship with the author?
Yeah, absolutely. So it completely varies from author to author, and sometimes I come in quite early on in the kind of acquisition process. So I might be part of a pitch to acquire an author. I might go along and meet an author for a meeting and kind of chat through my plans, my campaign objectives, even before we've acquired the book. But most often I kind of come in about 6 months pre-publication, and I'm introduced, and then I kind of speak to the author about what I'm aiming to do with their book and the campaign, and we kind of share ideas. Sometimes authors come with a bank of contacts, most often they don't. So it's about, we do the author questionnaire too, where we kind of give them leading questions about, are there any stories that they want to tell the press, kind of write pieces for the media that connect with their book. I also think it's really important. Author care is so important. And
author care, that's a nice expression.
I mean, author care has always been kind of the key component to being a publicist, and it's so important. I think in every publisher it should be. And so I've always been taught, even from when I was an assistant, that the author's needs come first. The author needs to be signed off on everything, and you should never assume that the author understands kind of the jargon, as you say, or the process, and you have to be really sensitive to their story. So yeah, the publicist is a really interesting role, because they're almost as close to the author as the editor, and in some ways more, because they're there for those. Well, pre-pandemic, I was there for the radio interviews and for the events where authors are sometimes appearing for the first time in their lives and talking about something that's so important to them. So you play a kind of hand-holding advisory role as well as kind of cheerleader, really.
Thank you. Very interesting. Towards the beginning of that response, hearing you use the word pitch, because a lot of people attending might be thinking that the pitch is something that they do to the publisher. But of course, people within the publishing house have to do that as well. Maybe tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So as an independent publisher, obviously I have the experience of being with Penguin and with Hachette, where pitches can be kind of staging the script of the book kind of in a realistic way. But a pitch for me, it should be kind of a love letter to the book and the author, and the publicity campaign can really kind of come into life that way. But yeah, I'm very used to kind of pitching to authors and hoping that they'll join Pushkin Press over another publisher, and hoping that our kind of vision for the book is the same as theirs, and that we share that, and that hopefully they'll come with us.
So in an ideal world, everybody's pitching to everybody else. The author's pitching to the publisher, and the editor is maybe pitching to the acquisitions team, and the publicist is pitching to somebody else.
Yeah, well, the publicist is pitching to kind of everybody, because the publicist works alongside sales to really kind of, the hope that everybody will be reading the books that, we're putting out. So that's when kind of proof copies come into play, and you speak to, well, nowadays you're speaking to people online too. So bloggers, as much as booksellers, as much as authors trying to get blurbs. It's really kind of on the ground work. And I love it. Yeah.
That's good to hear. Enthusiasm is, you can't put a price on it. Can I come back to you, Cherise, and ask you to tell us a bit maybe about the problems that might arise when you are editing a book, and how you might communicate with the author to resolve these?
So there's some of the more obvious technical problems that can arise. So especially during a structural edit, I think that can be...
Tell us, maybe, forgive me for pausing. What's a structural edit?
So as an editor, it's one of the first edits you go through when you receive the manuscripts, and it's kind of exactly as it sounds. You're going through the structure of the book, and you're saying, maybe the plot doesn't work this way, or the character, or the characterization, or it's really shifting the big parts around to make the story come together in a cohesive way. And so that is kind of the most sensitive, but also interesting part of the editing process, because you're really working with the author to solidify the central ideas of the book. And so, problems can arise when there's a lack of communication or understanding. If there's an idea the author is trying to get across that the reader and the editor isn't seeing, then it's working with the author to really tease that out and be able to put that back into the book. And that's a really interesting process. And beyond the technical issues that arise in publishing, or the those bits, there's also the problems that arise when you're dealing with anything with people. People experience life upheavals, and so it's working with the author, knowing what's happening in their life, knowing if you need to communicate to the rest of the team to delay other deadlines in order to support the author. And on top of, everyday life upheavals, moving, having a child, getting ill, there's also what's happening now, which is like massive worldwide upheavals of like pandemic, protesting, police brutality, and SARS. There are things that affect certain communities a lot, and the editor needs to step up to really support the author during those times.
Have you had any particular problems with authors that have come from the author?
Could you explain?
Well, maybe have you worked with anyone who I have a little list of people I've worked with who I will go out of my way not to work with again. So, authors who whose work I won't be keen to acquire again. I can't be the only editor who.
I feel quite fortunate. There may have been a few authors where there were some problems in the process, namely quite a few authors who were never ready to let the manuscript go and publication would be delayed and delayed and delayed. But I don't think that that would necessarily strike them off my list. I think that's a very understandable issue. I definitely empathized with that, despite it being a difficult thing to experience as a publisher who needs to, at some point, pass that manuscript over. Yeah, I think so far I've been quite fortunate, but I think I also take very seriously the pre-acquisition step when I meet them. You know, is this author going to be open to being edited?
Yeah.
And things like that. So
yeah, that's good to hear. Thank you. Jonathan, same question to you, really. And it's about the problems that arise when editing a book, and how do you resolve them with authors?
Yeah, it's a good question. Cherise's answer was admirably diplomatic, I have to say. there are. I think everyone's got a very short list of people who. In any case, so I acquire non-fiction, which has a whole different kind of element to it. So frequently you're signing books up from proposal, so a few thousand words and maybe one sample chapter, or some writing that's appeared elsewhere. So one of the challenges, I suppose, is making sure that the manuscript, when delivered, matches up to your expectations of it, which, I mean, they invariably do, but occasionally, there is a bit more kind of intervention that has to go on post submission. But in any case, I think that's I think it's quite useful to have the security of a contract when writing, which is why I quite like non-fiction acquisitions. I suppose delivery timing is always a concern. That the schedules occasionally slip, and it's about being, as she said, sensitive to changed circumstances. It's all very well. I remember watching I May Destroy You a few months ago, and the relationship between author and publisher in that is particularly toxic, I think, in the sense that the hard-nosed business sense takes precedence on every single occasion. I would like to reassure authors that it's not always that way. We're a lot more understanding than that would suggest. The longest I have personally waited for a book is, I think, about 12 years post-contract. That is not to be recommended, I would say. But yeah, of course, there are other shifting events that affect the content of books. So I've published quite a lot on Brexit in the past. I published a book called The Pandemic Century a couple of years ago that everyone thought, which predicted the next one was about to come around the corner, and everyone thought, oh, this is all pie in the sky stuff. So it fared quite well, but it's certainly had a second wind post COVID. I would say that the process on both sides is one of expectation management. So authors should make it clear what their expectations of the book are, and similarly, the publishers should be very clear on where the sales are going to come, which audience they're trying to reach, and I guess also, it's important for publishers to remember that somebody's book is probably the most important thing in their life. So it's entirely natural they'll be in touch regularly to check up on progress. But similarly, authors should remember that occasionally that their book is one of many. So I think sensitivity and understanding, although every book is obviously important, every book is designed, a commercial press like ours, to be profitable. So it's in your interest to publish it well and in a timely fashion and effectively. But yeah, there's you have to be aware of each other's circumstances, I would say.
Why is there that big difference between non-fiction publishing and fiction publishing? That, as you said earlier, in most cases in non-fiction publishing, you are acquiring from a proposal, and the book is not yet written, and the writer then goes away and writes the book. Whereas in most cases with fiction, they've written the book, they send it to you, you say this is great or this is not great. Why is there that difference historically? Do you know?
Well, it's a good question. I've never commissioned fiction, so I'm not sure I can answer it totally well, but I know what our publishing director would say, and that's that, you know, it's difficult to get a sense of the kind of narrative arc of a book, and particularly its ending, which is a crucial, in terms of fiction rather, a crucial element to a book. Basically, I think you can't really get a sense for how well a character is elaborated all the way, you know, all the way through, unless you read the full manuscript, because non-fiction is much more kind of fact-based. You can determine how well someone writes about it and what kind of insight they are able to provide in a few thousand words.
But in recent years, I think non-fiction has not been dominated, but there's been a lot more focus perhaps on narrative non-fiction, and you know, whether it be memoir or whatever. And I would have thought that probably the narrative arc in that was just as important as in fiction.
It is. So it's always a tricky compromise to arrive at. And I guess you have to take on faith frequently that
do you ever
basically the proposals need to be quite involved. You know,
Yeah.
it's not nothing. And I suppose they average between 5 and maybe 15 to 20,000 words. So you're reading a good chunk of material.
Yeah.
But again, it's those early meetings that are really important in terms of helping, you know, enabling the author to explain to you what the book will be about. Yeah.
Thank you, Jonathan. Poppy, can you talk us through how you build different campaigns around different kinds of books and authors?
Absolutely. So as I say, I work across the full scope of Pushkin Press, which is, I think we have about 6 imprints, maybe 5 to 6 imprints. So I've been working on the children's list, which has been really fun because children's authors are so supportive and wonderful. The community of children's writers are really special. Actually, tomorrow we're doing a roundtable event online with 6 Pushkin children's authors, which is wonderful. So for a children's book, recently I've got some books with me. We've just launched When Life Gives You Mangoes by Corinne Getton, which is an amazing middle grade debut novel. The author's Jamaican, based in Birmingham, and it's just
middle
been so
grade
much.
mean?
Middle grade, so between 7 and 12
Okay.
years old. Yeah, I didn't know what middle grade meant before, but yeah, between 7 and 12. So this campaign, so as you guys might know, the space for children's review coverage is dismally small in the national press. There are about 5 kind of key national review slots that we aim for with every children's book campaign. So you have to be so creative now more than ever and use online outlets. Luckily, there are lots of kind of children's spaces online. But yeah, to build this campaign, so we had early proofs, which we sent out widely to authors, to key booksellers, to key reviewers and bloggers, and we sort of ran a 1-month blog tour for the book around publication, where there's reviews and interviews with the author every day online, and you can follow along using a hashtag. But alongside those, I mean, with this book, we were so lucky. We've had recommendations. Mallory Blackman just recommended to read the book, as did Connie Huck and Dorothy Coomson. We've had reviews. The Sunday Times Culture gave it their Book of the Week slot for children's. It's just been the Week Junior Book of the Week. So we've had a real span of coverage in the kind of national and online space. But it's really just a build-up. It kind of is just a rolling build-up of fans, really, trying to get people to read the book, leave reviews, tell their friends about it, sending it to the right people. And hope, really crossing your fingers that people kind of do, because as you know, there's just so many books coming out every month. In September, there was 600 books on one day on the 3rd of September. So it's been a busy autumn because everyone's been moving their books across to, so that's children's. But for literary fiction, adult, it's much more kind of, it is still a long tail campaign, but you're looking at kind of key national reviews. So we just published When We Cease to Understand the World by Benjamin Labatut, which is a Chilean novel with endorsements from Philip Pullman and William Boyd, which we were really lucky to achieve. So that kind of gave me the first thing to say about the book, which is that Philip Pullman's reading this book, which was really lucky and amazing. And from that, I was able to land a big Guardian national review by John Banville for the book, which set it off. But then just briefly, there are other situations, like I work with literary estates, so where the author's no longer alive. We've just published, one of our biggest successes of this year was Seishi Yokomizo is Japan's Agatha Christie, and he wrote The Honjin Murders and the Inugami Curse. And our covers, Pushkin Press is famous for our kind of iconic covers. They sold the book, but what was brilliant was that on publication, the author's grandson was in the UK. So I was able to get him to do an interview with The Guardian. I was able to get him to do an event at Japan House. And that really kind of set the catalyst for other review coverage to follow. So it's not always that you need the author necessarily to be with us, but if you've got someone to talk about the book and champion the book, obviously it's always better if the author is there. But there are, I mean, as I say, every single campaign is different, and that's how you build it.
How important are bloggers nowadays?
They're so important. I've been working with them for 7 years, been working with bloggers, but they've just really, they come into their own. They can really build a campaign, and they are so interconnected in the kind of general kind of publishing industry. I think we're all using bloggers. I don't know about you guys, but I work with them a lot. We use them via NetGalley, which is a wonderful portal online where you can put a book up early, and bloggers can request to review the book, and then in exchange to read the book, and then leave a review in exchange. And then on publication, you can say to the bloggers who read it and liked it, would you transfer your reviews to Waterstones and Amazon and Hive, and leave your reviews there, and then and that can be, you know, incredible. For When Life Gives You Mangoes, we had 100 NetGalley reviews on publication, which could then be transferred across and kind of used as bait, or to build a kind of a Waterstones page, and then hopefully get us in favor with Waterstones and the indies. And so I think bloggers are central, and I love to work with them. It
all sounds very scientific, and
I think I'm quite scientific with it. I kind of like the nerdy stuff around, you know, I like to see the book obviously shoot up on Amazon. So I like to see a piece of press coverage run and then check Amazon and see where it's jumped to, because of that coverage. And I'm so lucky to have a role where I can actually see that my work in the world. It's a fun job. It's pressurizing.
Good to hear. Yeah. Cherise, could you tell us a bit about the relationship, how the relationship between the author and the publisher changes after the book is complete? So once, you know, you've done the editing, do you at that point just let go and wave bye-bye, kiss it good luck?
No, I wouldn't say so. I think it's interesting because as an editor, yes, I do kind of hand off then to production and to the publicist, but I'm still kind of the key contact for the author. So I'm still handling their book while it goes through those stages. And then when it's published, you know, I get to celebrate with the author again and again. So I'm celebrating with them at the launch with every good review, you know, when it gets a prize. It's just like, it's a beauty. I think a book has a long life, and the relationship with the author is even longer. You know, you might have another book with them, and you've spent so long building a good collaborative relationship, and you've kind of both put blood, sweat, and tears into it. I don't think you just let it go. You celebrate it for as long as it exists.
I think that there's a general understanding, and it might be false, that that the traditional long mutually supportive relationship between author and publisher is a thing of the past. You know, we're all aware, I think, of relationships where writers have written book after book after book, and they maybe get good reviews. They haven't done particularly well in terms of sales, but the publisher sticks by them and this is that author's publisher, and maybe remain that author's publisher. And I think there's a view that that's a historical thing, and that it's less, it doesn't really work like that anymore. But listening to you talk then, Cherise, it seems to me like maybe that sort of mutual support still exists, and that there can still be this long-term relationship between author and publisher.
I think that it's definitely one of Jacaranda's ethos and my ethos that we would like to invest not just in the book, but in the author and their career. So we particularly enjoy commissioning not just one, but whatever their next book will be. I think we still hearken to that idea.
Sorry, go ahead, carry on, please.
Oh, I would just say that at the same time, because we're such a small press, we understand when one of our authors does well and gets picked up by a bigger one. That's
a very interesting point. Please enlarge on that, please.
Well, I think it happens quite often at independent presses, especially small ones, you know, when an author or a book does well, obviously the big publishers are going to be interested in it, and they have the resources to offer that author more. And so as sad as it is to say goodbye, because obviously we would love to keep them, and some authors do choose to stay with the smaller one, or even some big authors from Penguin come to us after having a big Penguin contract. But there has to be that understanding of the author has to do what's best for them, and if they think that those resources are what they need, then you know you respect it and you wish the best for them, because often that does do a lot, you know, and it can be a mutually symbiotic relationship. Like even if they go to a big publisher and the publisher puts a lot of resources into it, that's going to come back still on the books that you've published for them.
It seems such a shame to me though when an author has a success with a smaller publisher and immediately buggers off, moves to a much bigger publisher, and I think where's your loyalty to the publisher? Where's your sense of gratitude that publisher managed to achieve that success for you? Do you know what I mean?
I completely understand that. I also understand that a lot of people need to make a living, and small presses, you know, we aren't usually able to offer, you know,
small presses, you may not offer big advances, but all publishers offer royalties. Yeah. And so if a book is selling, which you know, I'm presuming it's going to sell, whether you're with a small publisher or a big publisher, there's going to be income eventually. But I guess maybe, and I'm going to bring you as well in here, Jonathan, in here if I can. I'm guessing that maybe the author is thinking, or the author's agent more likely is thinking, okay, it's time to move to a bigger publisher, either because of the advance that might be forthcoming, or because the bigger publisher will be able to generate more sales, and so there'll be more royalties. Is that a fair description of the way it works?
Yeah, I've been on both sides of the divide, having worked for a really small indie, and we were three people when I joined Hearst in London. So, and actually some of my most effective acquisitions there have been passed over by much larger publishers, you know, given the author a relatively small advance, and it's gone to sell £250,000 pounds worth of books. So, but I would say on the flip side that I think it's probably kind of common sense that some of these larger publishers with larger sales networks, a more extensive rep force and historic relationships with major retailers who can put a bit of marketing and publicity spend, more marketing and publicity spend, tube advertising conceivably, you know, behind a book. Yeah. Inevitably, they're going to sell more copies and they can pay more. Yeah. It's not a rule of thumb, but I mean, you know, even on our side of the business at HarperNorth, I would like to think that and this goes for today's acquisition, that we can still break new authors, and that persistence and loyalty can reap dividends. I think the classic example is Stuart Prophet with Penguin, with Bernardine Evaristo. She was published by Penguin to relatively modest success for a long time, but that he continued to back her. I mean, there is obviously a commercial imperative, but equally, you're investing in the future of an author. You're building their profile in conjunction with your own sales, I mean, just in terms of the practicalities of how you keep an author engaged and motivated, the relationship is kind of symbiotic in the best kind of scenarios. Obviously, there are occasionally there are option clauses, which means that you inevitably see the next project anyway. But also, I go to some efforts to suggest new directions, avenues for research, places to travel, subjects to tackle.
Again, this is another difference between fiction and non-fiction, do you think?
I don't think so, necessarily. I think, well, I mean, obviously the impetus for a novel is frequently found with the author, but equally, a publisher can suggest what might sell next time round, what their strengths are, which character they might develop, even kind of center a book around, again, a sequel, let's say. But it's about doing the human stuff well as well, congratulating authors on promotions, in a day job, on moves, on achievements, on life events, even new books for other publishers, because it might be that an author moves to, as Cherise said, and Poppy I think as well, they might go to a much larger publisher, find that they didn't have the rewarding experience they wanted to, and return to you, and that's definitely conceivable.
In which case, I wonder if the smaller press previously spurned welcomes the author back with open arms, or do they say, oh, well, you didn't want us before, did you?
I think it's a dangerous business, holding grudges in publishing. Is such a small industry. So.
I was going to say, it's the smallest industry there is.
Jonathan, what about, is there anything you can add about the relationship between author and publisher after the book's finished?
Yeah, I mean, it never really finishes, I would say, and it's about continuing to be in touch. It's some of what Poppy said was kind of instructive. I like to publish books that have long tails publicity-wise and might see another lease of life. And it's about sensing opportunities around things on the backlist as much as anything else. So just remembering that you published a book, that you found it interesting, and that it speaks to something that's recently become hugely topical. And repackaging, convincing the author to write a new preface or introduction, reframing that material. It's not always possible, but sometimes it's about continuing. If I were to have my commercial hat on, it's about continually monetizing that IP, the intellectual property. But it's more than that.
Jonathan, remind me, how long has HarperNorth been going, and how many books did you say? About 5 or 6 books you've acquired?
Yeah, I think it's 5 as of this week. And we've been about since July. So, but from a standing start. So normally, when you're founding a new imprint, you might already work for that organisation. You might have spent 2 years building up a launch list to go live with. But we're kind of shaping it as we go along, which means that we're quite open to new things, I think, and new avenues.
And do you think, and when the books come out, will they say HarperNorth, or will they say Harper or HarperCollins or Harper Perennial, or?
They'll say HarperNorth. In fact, the first one is out in 3 weeks, and actually it's a classic example of kind of opportunistic publishing. So it's about it's a sports book. It's by an independent football correspondent called Melissa Reddy, who's been following Liverpool Football Club for a long time, but never written a book. And there was such a good opportunity post title win to commission something new. So she wrote it amazingly, 55,000 words in 4 weeks.
Wow.
And we're publishing it extremely rapidly to crash it out for Christmas. Yeah. But yeah, it says HarperNorth on the spine.
In time for Liverpool's great crash down the descent down the table as Manchester City take their place at the top.
One can only hope. I would say United, I'm afraid.
Oh dear. Oh dear. Zoe has rejoined us. Hello, Zoe. Are we?
Hello, I've unmuted. Yeah, I've popped back up because we've got tons of questions from people. Is
okay.
that I jump in?
Yes, please do.
Cool, and I'll try and assign them, but a lot of them might be that concern all of you basically, and you might be able to answer. So if any of you have an answer, just jump in. So Antonio is asking whether what's the state of kind of manuscripts being accepted at the moment? Are there more or fewer manuscripts being accepted at the moment due to kind of consumer appetite maybe fluctuating, or due to challenges in the publishing industry with people shielding, working from home, bookshops having been closed? Have any of you noticed or had to scale back on what you're accepting at the moment, or not? Or has it gone the opposite way?
Who's going to take that? Someone jump in.
I know as an independent small press, we did kind of make that decision that we needed to conserve and focus our resources, and we had to be really strategic about any acquisitions that we made. And it didn't mean that we stopped, but we had to be, it was a really tough decision, and it's one that I've noticed when we sent our manuscripts to other small independent presses around the world as well, that they're making a similar decision of conserving right now.
Jonathan, have you found the same?
Well, I mean, I've been lucky enough to be, starting a list this time with the backing of a fairly large company. So my experience has actually been that I've been almost completely overwhelmed with the number of submissions we've had, from agents and from open submissions. I think it's been a time of extraordinary creativity for some people, even in and amongst the challenges that we've faced. So, I think people are writing away, that's for sure, or being inspired to, I think some people have found that they have more time to embark on projects that they've wanted to for a long time. But in terms of where we are, I'm going to be commissioning upwards of 10, but probably 10 or 15 books in the first year. I think HarperNorth more broadly 20 to 25, something like that. Mm-hmm. So relatively modest output, but
so it depends on the position of the company, really, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. So Kate is asking, so she's been editing her novel for around 4 months, and is unlikely to feel like it's ever going to be ready, which I think is a familiar feeling from a lot of writers. So if she's been editing it for 4 months, do you guys feel that it's too early to approach an agent or a publisher at this stage? Should she have a final version ready for a publisher or an agent, do you guys think? Nick, what do you think about that?
I think it should definitely be finished. I mean, the worst thing you can do, not the worst thing, but one of the worst things you can do is offer an unfinished novel to a publisher. Let's say they read the opening 3 chapters and they say, this is great, can I have the rest of it? And you say, okay, I haven't quite finished it, I'm still editing. I think you've got to finish it. I'm sure the editors, publishers would agree with me. Agree with me, Cherise.
It's interesting because I have received manuscripts that I wouldn't say were finished, but that I could envision a future for, and especially once speaking further with the author, and making sure that we shared that vision for where it was going. I have commissioned off of that.
Okay. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'd just say that there has to come a time when you have to place faith in your own work. That you could end up tinkering for decades, and as long as you're sufficiently happy with the thing you're submitting, then don't be afraid to put yourself out there. I mean, that is what you'll be doing with a book after all. So, yeah.
Amazing. So this is a question for Poppy. And I think this is more a question about kind of entering the publishing industry as staff. So Paris was curious if you'd had any experience in journalism prior to going into publicity, Poppy, and she's also asking, how does a publicist build their contacts, or does some of them come with the publishing house that you're working for? So that's a few different questions there.
Yeah, that's a really good question. No, I've never worked in, although I did do work experience at the Daily Mail on the showbiz section, which was quite fun. But that was like less than a week. So no, the answer is I didn't. And I went straight into doing work experience at Penguin Children's 7 years ago. But the contacts come over time. So when I first started out as a publicity assistant, I worked with publicity directors who were doing the publications for Sarah Waters and Margaret Atwood. I was lucky at Virago at Little Brown, and Linda Grant. And so I got to kind of organise schedules and book hotel rooms and do all that kind of stuff. But then over time, as I got as the publicity director trusted me, they would bring me along to journalist meetings. So I'd come with them to a coffee, or I would go to meet a literary festival organizer and run through our list on behalf of my manager. So it comes over time. And I think when you work, so in terms of like the women's magazine like group of journalists who work on like Stylist and Red and Good Housekeeping, I know them all so well now because I've been going to them for years with the same kind, with literary fiction and non-fiction. But it really is just time, and unfortunately journalists are human too, so they have to trust a publicist, and they must receive hundreds of pitches every day from publicists, but they will go to I know that they will go to the ones that they trust and they know. So it can be really hard for junior publicists, and so when they first land their big review in the Observer or somewhere, they should be really proud of themselves, because it's older publicists who've been in the industry longer have these friendships with journalists which can take them further quickly. So yeah,
absolutely, yeah, it's massively relationship based, isn't it? Again,
absolutely, yeah, you'll know.
So there's another question for you, Poppy, from Silja. She's asking how long in hours, or if it's more, would you spend with a debut author discussing their strategy, their publicity strategy, or their marketing strategy?
Well, I would say it really depends. And actually, I've loved Zoom calls for this, because we've had loads of Zoom calls with authors, debut authors, Corinne Getton, the author of When Life Gives You Mangoes being one of them, where marketing, publicity, editorial will join. I would say a phone call or a Zoom call of an hour or less. But what I really think, because I just need to get on with pitching, and I need to get on with kind of speaking to people about the book, but I really make an effort to let the author know what they can be doing in the meantime and how they can keep themselves busy. Can they be creating an Instagram account for themselves? Can they be reading other authors in the space? They need to be, because I understand as an author they must be sitting there kind of watching their emails thinking, what is she doing? But actually there are so many things they can get on with in the meantime. But yeah, it must be a nerve-wracking process for the authors as well. So yeah, over communication is key.
Definitely. And what authors can be doing themselves is what we'll be covering in our next panel tomorrow.
Right.
Interesting, yeah. So professionals will be talking about how to set up your own marketing in their own time.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so if anyone's particularly interested in that, make sure you're here tomorrow. So again, this is more of a kind of hiring question, but do you guys have any skills that you consider most valuable when entering into the industry? And how can people set themselves up best for this in terms of, work experience and the hiring process? Do you guys have anything to say about that?
I think work experience is so important these days, isn't it? Did you guys Cherise, did you do work experience before you joined Jacaranda?
So I did internships while I was doing my master's in publishing, but I only did paid internships because that was all I could afford. And I think instead of doing any further work experience post that, I would do quite a bit of freelance. Nice. And I think that's kind of similar to work experience for an editor, at least.
Yeah. I think work experience is so important because I didn't even know that publicity really existed as a role. I just thought everything was editorial. So when you go into a publishing house and you see that there's production and there's design and there's marketing and sales, and it's so important to kind of get in there and orient yourself and see where you might fit, because it might not be editorial, but that's not the be all and end all. You might want to be in production, which some of the most amazingly talented people are in production, creating the books, getting them made.
Yeah, I just say that it's obviously not possible for everyone to do the kind of standard tour of internships that has hitherto been required. There are various kind of programs and paid programs that can really help. But I mean, I think having demonstrable office experience, especially as a new graduate, is really helpful as well. It's about your ability to hold down a job as much as it is your vocational suitability towards publishing. So I actually, because I graduated into the pit of the 2008 recession, I spent a bit of time. I managed to get temporary jobs at Oxford University Press, but I was being paid a salary. I was doing useful, constructive work. I wasn't just left photocopying, and I think that really helped. But I wouldn't be discouraged. And I would say actually, just on the HarperNorth front, that we have these kind of, they're called Northern Lights, which are kind of day-long work experience sessions where you get to talk to lots of people in different departments about what their job involves, which is kind of instructive, I would say.
Yeah, I would just add that I think the industry is trying to, or certain people in the industry are trying to make it more transparent so people outside can get more of a sense of what the different roles are. And I think if you already know what role you want, so for me, I knew that it was editorial. I'd known about all the other positions, but I knew that it was editorial. So I got the first job I could as an editor, which was academic, but then spent all of my free time. So I learned all the technical skills, but then spent all my free time freelance editing fiction, specifically diverse fiction, because I knew that that's what I wanted to work in. And then also took the initiative to start my own literary magazine because I knew I wanted to start editing the voices I wanted to hear immediately. Like I didn't want to wait.
I would also add that I've started my own Instagram page. It's a Bookstagram page. It's called Poppy and Her Books, and that's really kind of introduced me to a whole other aspect of book publicity, which is now on Instagram. So I'm able to publicize as well as receive review copies from other publishers. I'm able to keep up to date with what's going on. So any wannabe publicists or marketers out there, I would create your own Bookstagram pages or Twitter accounts and show that you're a passionate reader, because at the end of the day, that's really what everyone wants to be. It's to someone to be is passionate about reading and stories. Yeah,
that's great advice, Poppy. So we're running out of time, so we're not going to have time to answer all of these questions, so sorry to everyone who we can't answer. So I've just picked out a few that I think will be helpful for a lot of people. So Jonathan, I think this is one for you. How detailed should the outline of each chapter for a non-fiction book be, if you were taking a pitch for a non-fiction book?
Yeah, it's a good question. They kind of vary enormously between 50 words and several hundred, possibly even 1,000. I would say enough to give a good sense of what you'll cover thematically, and in terms of of case studies or like vignettes. Several hundred words, I would say, at minimum, really. I don't know if that's very helpful, but it'll obviously be in the context of a framing outline and ideally a writing sample as well. So yeah.
Cherise or Nick, do you have like a certain amount that you look for from pitches, a certain amount of word for each chapter?
So I normally, when I'm looking at submissions, I ask for either the first 3 chapters or the first 30 pages and then a synopsis.
Cool.
Yeah, I like to get a very quick sense of what somebody's writing is like. So, I can generally get that from a page. And as Cherise says, then a synopsis as well.
Great, thank you. Sarah is asking, because of kind of the move away from traditionally obtaining an agent before anything else, and the more open submission schemes that are coming about, which is great because it opens up the floor to a lot of different people. But she's wondering how the author is then safeguarded without an agent's guidance, so against raw deals, etc. So I'm kind of looking for advice on getting the best monetary deal from the publisher. If you guys have any advice on that.
I'm not sure about necessarily monetary deals. It depends who you're pitching to. If it's an independent, it's going to be a small deal, probably either way. But what we do at Jacaranda is when we offer the contract, we also advise the author to go to the Society of Authors, have them look over it, come back to us and discuss any concerns they have.
That's very good advice, I think, Cherise.
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a lot of information to be found online about kind of average advance levels. There was obviously this, huge kind of publishing paid me set of threads earlier in the year, which was enlightening even for an established publisher. I would say that you'd want to work with a publisher that kind of valued your work enough to give you an offer that incentivized you to write the book. On the non-fiction side, of course, I'm commissioning from proposal, so the bulk of the work is yet to be done. So it's about you try and come up with a deal that is substantial enough that people will be able to live, won't find themselves on the breadline, and also that makes sense kind of commercially. And on our side as well, the thing to remember is that any publishing advance is split between various stages. So there's signature of a contract, delivery of a manuscript, first publication, and then second publication, so a later paperback. So you're not going to see all that money up front, but you will, ideally earn it out and then see further royalties in future. So it's about taking a kind of calculated risk, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Thanks, guys. I think we've run out of time. I'm really sorry to anyone who had questions that weren't answered, but I think we covered a lot of ground. So
yeah, I just want to add that we're actually currently hiring for a press officer. So if anyone's looking to join a brilliant independent press as a publicist and work with me, we're hiring. So check out Pushkin Press's Twitter page or website, and you can apply before the 6th of November, I think. Thank you.
Great job.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Poppy. I think loads of people will be interested.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much to my panelists, to Cherise, Poppy, Jonathan, and Nick for being here. Thank you to the Writing School for partnering with us. And our next free event will be tomorrow at 11 a.m. That's author marketing and building your online brand. And this will be available to play back if you need to go back through whatever anyone said. So it'll stay on our YouTube channel, Uncommon's YouTube channel. So thanks so much, everybody. I'm going to end.
Thanks
very much.
Bye.
Been a pleasure.
Bye, Cherise.